I've never been the kind of guy to believe those stories about strange things on the road, you know? I always thought that people were traveling or forging these experiences to give an air of mystery. But after that night, in Montana, I never doubted anything again. I'll try to explain what happened, but I don't know if I can. Words will never convey the feeling I felt that night. I was in the middle of a long trip, alone, going from one point to another, and I-90 was emptier than ever. The sky was clear, but darkness seemed to swallow everything around. It was one of those nights where everything is so quiet that you can hear the truck engine as if it were a thump in your chest. I was driving and, at that point, it had been a few hours since I passed anyone. The road seemed endless, and tiredness was already setting in. That's when I saw it. A truck stopped in the distance, coming towards me. But it wasn't just any truck. It was that kind of old truck, with big headlights and a design that looked like it was from the top-of-the-world era. But the strangest thing is that I didn't see anyone in the cabin. No silhouette, no reflection. The truck was coming towards me, and the driver? Nothing. Just the sound of the engine. I tried to blink to make sure I was seeing correctly, and then he just walked past me, very slowly, almost without making a sound. I didn't pay much attention at the time, because, well, I was tired and thought it might be a hallucination. Until I decided to follow. I didn't really know what made me keep following him. Maybe it was the fact that I had this strange feeling that something was there, but I didn't know what exactly. The truck seemed to be heading towards the solitude of the road, and, as I accelerated to get closer to it, I began to notice that, no matter how much faster I was, it wasn't getting any further away from me. He was in front, but he wasn't moving away. I increased the speed, and he seemed to be at the same pace. It sent a chill down my spine. I tried to keep my cool, telling myself that this could all be an illusion, but no. It wasn't. That's when it happened. Suddenly, the truck disappeared. I'm not talking about taking a turn or taking a detour. No. He just disappeared. As if it had evaporated. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, not knowing what to do. I looked everywhere, even out the window, and nothing. There was no sign of him having turned anywhere. I passed that stretch a couple of times, trying to understand what had happened, but the truck was no longer there. At first, I thought I had gone crazy, but something inside me knew that wasn't it. I stopped the truck shortly after, on the side of the road, trying to process what had just happened. What was that? A truck disappearing like that, out of nowhere? I stayed there for a few minutes, staring into space, hoping that something would give me an explanation. But nothing came. Nothing but those long shadows from the road, stretching as far as the eye could see. I took a deep breath and, without much choice, moved on. I just wanted to get off that road, forget what I saw, and continue the journey. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't leave me for the rest of the night. The morning passed slowly, and I couldn't stop thinking about the truck. Something inside me knew this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a hallucination. I'm not the type of person to trip over these things, but as much as I tried to deny it, something was off. It was then that, the next day, in the little town where I stopped to rest, I ended up hearing a story. A story I never thought I would hear. I sat down in a cafe and started talking to the owner, an old man who seemed to know everything that happened in that region. He commented that, years ago, a truck had disappeared on that exact stretch of road. No one ever knew what happened, and the strangest thing was that the truck never appeared anywhere else after that. The driver then also disappeared. I didn't want to believe it, but the old man told me that some people started saying that the truck was stuck in that section, as if it were some kind of spirit or something. The story gave me goosebumps, and I tried to laugh nervously, as if it were just another road story. But the problem is that the description of the truck, its appearance, matched exactly what I had seen. Even the sound of the engine. The old man told me that whoever dared to follow the truck would never be the same again. Some said he simply disappeared with anyone who got too close to him. It made me think, was I about to be part of this story? I went back to the road with my head full, but not knowing if I believed in it or not. Those old man's words kept ringing in my mind, but I wanted to move on. I needed it. The trip was still long, and honestly, I didn't know what else could happen. But with each passing kilometer, I began to feel more and more restless, as if what I had seen that night had marked me in some way. I was attentive to everything, not knowing what to look for. Would the truck appear again? Or was it all in my head? The worst of all was when, further down the road, something made me stop again. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt a pressure, a weight in the air, as if someone was watching me. I slowed down, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. Suddenly, in the rearview mirror, I saw the lights of a truck approaching. My heart started to race, and the feeling of dread came back with a vengeance. I knew what was happening. I was being followed, and the truck was coming at me, once again. I quickly looked ahead, but there was no one in sight. There was no way he could have gotten closer so quickly, unless he was right behind me the whole time. I tried to speed up, as if I was running from something, but something strange happened. The truck was no longer behind me, it was beside me. I could see the lights reflecting off the side window. But there was no one driving. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Nothing. No figures, no reflections in the cabin. I didn't see hands on the steering wheel, I didn't see anyone's face. Just the lights and the sound of the engine, which seemed to get louder and louder, as if the truck was pressing down on the air around me. I was practically frozen with fear, not knowing what to do. It was then that, without warning, the truck's lights went out, and everything went dark again. I stopped the truck on the side of the road and stood there for minutes, maybe even longer. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if I was out of my mind. I looked at the sky, at the horizon, but nothing seemed to make sense. After a few minutes, when I could finally breathe again, I looked back. And there was nothing else. The truck was gone, just like last time. There was no sign of lights, engines, anything. Just the road and the night, as if nothing had happened. I stayed there for a while longer, trying to understand what happened, but I couldn't. There was no explanation. I knew I hadn't dreamed. I knew that, somehow, it had been real. When I finally managed to continue the journey, I realized that my mind was elsewhere. The road didn't seem the same, the silence was more oppressive and the night was thicker. I never heard of another truck like that in that region, and I didn't want to know. To this day, I still can't understand what happened that night. I don't know if I saw a ghost, an illusion, or if some kind of inexplicable event took over me. All I know is that, somehow, I saw that truck, and it disappeared. And to this day, nothing makes sense. What happened on that road? I don't know, and I don't know if I will ever know. I never thought I would experience something that would make me question my sanity during a work trip. I've been a truck driver for years and have driven through almost every state, but nothing compared to that night on I-70 in Colorado. I was going from Denver to Kansas City, which is a long and lonely trip. It was one of those chilly autumn nights, and the road was deserted. I loved the silence of the road at night, the only sound being the truck's engine and the noise of the wheels cutting across the asphalt. But that night, the silence was broken by something I couldn't explain. I was driving, a little tired, trying to stay awake, when suddenly, I started to hear a sound. At first I thought it was the wind hitting the trailer, but no. They were steps. Heavy, shuffling footsteps, as if someone was walking back and forth inside my trailer. I paused for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing a trick on me because of how tired I was. But the footsteps continued. They were not fast, as if someone was rushing, but rather slow, deliberate, as if someone were walking from one side to the other, without any rush. I stopped the truck on the side of the road and got out, trying to find an explanation. My trailer was completely closed, with nothing out of the ordinary. There were no signs that anything or anyone had entered there. I looked around the entire perimeter, but found nothing. There was nothing out of place. I thought it was some kind of error in the sound system or even a problem with the engine. I went back to the cabin, tried to ignore it, but I could barely concentrate. The sound continued, louder now, and seemed to be coming from inside the trailer, as if it were watching me. I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of glitch, that I was being paranoid, but it didn't make sense. The sound continued for hours without ceasing. With every kilometer I walked, the steps seemed to follow the same rhythm, always in the same place, as if someone was walking inside, but not actually moving. It was as if the trailer was empty and full at the same time. I tried turning off the radio, closing the window, and even convincing myself that it was just the wind, but the feeling that something was there, something that shouldn't be, wouldn't leave me alone. I didn't know what to do. The idea of stopping and investigating again seemed insane, because as sure as I was that something was up, I didn't want to find myself being the crazy one on the road. So I moved on. I looked in the rearview mirror constantly, hoping to see something, anything. The sound of footsteps didn't stop. Every now and then it would subside, but then it would soon return, as if someone was testing my patience, or perhaps amused by my discomfort. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? "Hi, I'm driving alone, and there's someone walking around in my trailer, but I can't find them." No, that wasn't going to work. So what was left for me? Just keep driving, hoping the sound would go away. But he didn't disappear. Throughout the trip, the sound was still there, accompanying me, as if it were following every curve in the road. At times, he seemed closer, as if someone were approaching me. And in others, it seemed to move away, as if it were heading towards the back of the trailer. But anyway, no matter where I looked or what I did, the footsteps didn't stop. I was already starting to wonder if I was really hearing something or if it was all just a hallucination. Fatigue and stress were taking over me, but something inside me told me that what I was hearing wasn't just in my head. That's when I decided to give it one last try. I stopped at a gas station on the highway, near a small town I barely recognized. I tried to relax a little, have a coffee, take a look around, maybe find something that would make me understand what was happening. I got out of the truck, my heart still pounding, and took a look at the trailer. No signs of tampering, nothing. There was no one around. But the feeling was there. I could feel that something was out of place, something that had no explanation. I took a quick walk around the truck but, once again, found nothing. No footprints, nothing that could justify the steps. I went back to the truck, still trying to process it all. I knew something was happening, but I couldn't understand what. It was a feeling of indescribable terror, something you can't get out of your head even when you try. I started the engine again, and for some reason the footsteps were louder now. There were no longer slow steps, as before. Now they were fast, hurried, as if someone was running in the trailer behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw something that made me freeze, a shadow, passing quickly, on the side of the trailer, as if someone had moved quickly past the side window. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I knew that what I had seen was not a reflection. It wasn't a reflection of anything. I was paralyzed. The sound of footsteps had intensified, and now it was as if someone was banging against the interior walls of the trailer. That sound was no longer just footsteps. It was as if someone was trying to free themselves from inside, trying to get out of some tight place, as if they were trapped. My heart was beating so hard I could almost hear it beating in my head. I didn't know whether to get out of the truck or keep driving. Something told me to stop, but the other part of me was afraid to just stand there and wait for whatever it was. It was then that I decided to stop. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped the truck on the side of the road again, in the middle of nowhere, and quickly got out. I went to the trailer, once again, with adrenaline coursing through my veins. When I got there, I opened the door in a hurry, almost without courage, and entered. There was nothing. There was no one. The trailer was empty, as it always should be. I breathed a sigh of relief for a second, but then, the sound of footsteps started again. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. And then, an icy sensation came over me, as if something was watching me, something inside, even without me being able to see it. With an irrational impulse, I got back in the truck and took off down the road, accelerating as much as I could, as if I was running away from something. But the footsteps, the damned footsteps continued. I continued driving until dawn, without stopping, and it was only when the sun began to rise that the sound finally stopped. As if part of the darkness, he disappeared with the light of day. I thought maybe it was over, that my mind had gone crazy or something. But, to this day, whenever I pass that road, especially at night, I remember. I don't know what that was. I don't know if they were the footsteps of a living being or something that no longer belongs to this world. I just know that, since that day, I have never looked at the road the same way again. I don't know what happened that night, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. But the sound of it, the footsteps, will stay with me forever. And I never heard the same kind of silence on the road again. I'm not the type to get scared easily, but that night in Utah, I almost lost it. I was on I-15, it was late, the road was empty, as it always is, and the cold night air made me feel increasingly isolated. He was alone, as usual, and the only company was the sound of the truck's engine. The sky was clear, but everything around me felt oppressive. The mountains in the distance gave a feeling of confinement, as if the world around me was much larger than the stretch of road I was passing by. It was then that I saw him. A man, standing on top of a hill, on the side of the road. It was quite far away, but I saw it clearly. He seemed to simply be watching, motionless. The light from the headlights reflected off his silhouette, and even at that distance, something bothered me. He was very still, very calm, and the empty road only amplified this strange feeling. It wasn't the kind of thing you see on any road. And at that time of night, with how cold it was, I found all of this uncomfortable. Without thinking much, I stopped the truck. I knew I should ignore it and move on, but something made me want to stop and see what was going on. The man looked so out of place. I turned on the high beams and started to get out of the truck. The air was cold, sharp, and the silence of the night only increased the feeling that something was wrong. I looked at the hill, trying to find some explanation, but the figure didn't move. I started walking towards him, taking long strides, but with every step I took, the man seemed further away. I couldn't understand. When he was about 20 meters away, the man simply disappeared. It wasn't a sudden movement, nor a run, he just wasn't there anymore. I stopped immediately, looking around, trying to understand what had happened. There was no sign of anything. There was no place he could have hidden, no trees or large rocks. The top of the hill was completely empty. I stood there for a long time, trying to digest what I had just seen, but it didn't make sense. What was that? How did he disappear so quickly? I just knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to explain it. I quickly returned to the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there, in the booth, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. The image of that man standing motionless on the hill was still in my head. How did he disappear like that? It didn't make any sense. There was no way he could have come down so quickly without me noticing. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize, something inside me knew that what I had seen had no logical explanation. I accelerated the truck and followed, but even though the road was calm, fear was stuck in me, like a shadow that wouldn't leave me. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, anything, but nothing. The journey continued in silence, and I tried to leave it behind, but the thought wouldn't leave my head. The man on the hill. It was as if he had challenged me in some way. As if he knew I was going there and, when he saw me approaching, he just disappeared. I knew I couldn't ignore it, so the next day I stopped in a small town to rest. I decided to ask about the area, just to try to understand if there was anything strange there. The gas station attendant, an older guy, seemed hesitant when I mentioned the hill. He looked at me with a strange expression, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then he spoke, in a low voice, as if he were afraid to tell the story. "That hill, we've seen things there," he said, with a serious tone. "Not long ago, a man was found dead in that area. They said he died alone, with no explanation, but some locals believe he is still there. It's not uncommon for someone to see a figure on top of that hill, especially at night." I almost couldn't react. What he was saying was absurd, but at the same time, it made sense. The man, the one I saw, maybe it was him. Perhaps the dead man's spirit was still there, waiting for something or someone. I asked more about his death, but the old man didn't want to go into details. He told me that the details didn't matter, that what was important was that something strange happened on that road. And that many drivers had similar stories. But the most curious thing was when he told me, "I don't know what it is, but when you see that man on the hill, the feeling is that he is waiting for someone who must come to him." That chilled me to the bone. I didn't know what that meant, but after hearing that, the image of the man on the hill became even more disturbing in my mind. I left the gas station feeling like something much bigger than I could understand was happening. What was that man? Why was he there, on that hilltop, waiting for me? Those old man's words echoed in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. I still had a long road ahead of me, but with every kilometer that passed, the feeling that something was watching me grew. Fear wouldn't leave me alone. The road seemed longer now, and the silence of the night, which had once been comfortable, now became deafening. I decided to head back to I-15, the same route I had taken that night, as if trying to convince myself that this was all just my head playing tricks on me. Maybe I was exaggerating, maybe tiredness was affecting my perception. But I couldn't resist. Something was pulling me back, calling me to the hill. I needed to see if the figure was still there. Even though reason told me not to return, my curiosity and that inexplicable fear kept me going. I reached the hill around midnight, and the road was completely empty. There was no one else around. The sky was covered with clouds, and the wind, which had previously been calm, now seemed to have strength, whispering through the trees. I stopped the truck at a safe distance, and looked up at the top of the hill. Nothing. There was no one there. I tried, for a moment, to relax, to tell myself that it was all nonsense. But deep down, I knew something was about to happen. I was about to give up on everything, when a shadow appeared. It started small, but slowly grew, as if something was forming at the top of the hill. I couldn't see very well, but the silhouette of a man began to stand out, up there. My heart raced, and a biting cold came over me. I accelerated the truck, ready to get out of there, but before I could do anything, the figure disappeared again. No warning. No sound. As if it had never been there. I stood still, looking at the road, breathing quickly. There was nothing else. The hilltop was empty once again. I didn't know what I had seen. I didn't know if it was a hallucination or if there really was something supernatural on that road. But one thing was certain, the man on the hill was not just a legend. He was there, waiting for me, as if he had a purpose, something I couldn't understand. I didn't want to know anymore. I didn't want to go back to that place. And since that night, I have never been on that road at night again. Something on that hill told me I shouldn't go back, and I listened. I never heard of anyone seeing that man again, but if you ever go down that road, be careful. He might be waiting for you too. I was on I-40 in Tennessee, coming back from a delivery, late at night. The sky was clear, but the cold autumn air seemed to make the road even more deserted and silent. It was one of those nights when loneliness weighs heavily, and the sound of the truck engine is the only company. I was a little tired, the kind of tired that builds up every hour on the road, when suddenly I saw the lights of a truck turning on in the distance. He was parked on the side of the road, with no one around. There seemed to be no reason to do so, as the road was deserted and there was no sign of another vehicle in sight. This made me take a closer look. The light was steady, but the truck looked strange. I slowed down to get closer and see what was happening. It was unusual to see a truck like that, abandoned in the middle of the road, especially at such a late hour. As I got closer, I noticed that the truck's engine was off, but the lights were still on, illuminating the road and making the scene seem even more unreal. My instincts told me to go straight and continue my journey, but something about that scene made me stop. As I didn't see any other vehicles nearby, I decided to stop and investigate. I parked my truck behind the other, got out and went towards the vehicle. As I approached, the silence on that road seemed to increase even more. The truck was empty. There was no one inside or around, and the cabin was completely silent. I opened the truck door, and that's when I saw the keys on the driver's seat, still there, as if someone had gotten out of the vehicle and forgotten to pick them up. The scene was disturbing. I looked to the side, hoping to see some sign of someone, some clue as to what was happening, but everything was completely empty and silent. The strangest thing was that, although the truck seemed to have been left suddenly, there were no signs of a struggle or any kind of disorder. He looked perfectly normal, except for the fact that he was there, alone, in the middle of the road, with the lights on and no one around. I grabbed the keys, on impulse, almost as if I was trying to find some explanation for what was happening. But it didn't make any sense. How does someone just abandon their truck in the middle of the road, with everything running? I looked for a few more minutes, but didn't see anything else that could give me answers. What made me most nervous was the feeling that, even though I was there alone, it felt like something was watching me. I couldn't explain it, but the air was thick, heavy, as if there was an invisible presence in that place. After a few minutes, I decided to get back in my truck and continue on my way. The feeling of discomfort didn't leave me, but I knew there was nothing more I could do. I tried to convince myself that it was all just something trivial, a broken truck or something similar, but the feeling of strangeness persisted. I went back to my truck, still with the keys to the other truck in hand, as if, somehow, that could give me some explanation. As I got back on the road, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The strangest thing is that I found no sign that the truck had been abandoned recently. No accumulated dust, nothing out of the ordinary to indicate it had been there for days. Even so, the discomfort didn't leave me. The next day, still unable to forget that night, I decided to look for more information about the truck. The road in Tennessee isn't big, and the nearest town wasn't exactly busy. I stopped at a gas station to talk to the attendant, who seemed to know everything. I asked him about that abandoned truck, but he didn't seem surprised. He looked at me with an almost tired expression, as if he had heard that story before. That truck? It's been abandoned for days, he said, his tone somber. Nobody knows what happened to the driver, but we've had some drivers pass by and see the same thing. Truck stopped, lights on, but no one inside. The attendant told me that, a few days earlier, a truck driver had mysteriously disappeared. No one knew how, but he just disappeared. His truck was found right where I saw it, with the lights on and the doors open, but no sign of who was driving it. No one could say where the driver went, or what happened to him. There were no signs of a struggle, robbery, or any other obvious reason for the disappearance. The most disturbing thing was that the truck had been found in the same spot on the road where I saw it, and the keys in the seat were nothing new. The driver had simply disappeared, leaving no trace. The feeling of discomfort and the chill down my spine increased even more when the attendant said, "It happens from time to time. Anyone who passes by there at night feels a strange presence. It's as if that truck was waiting for someone, and, somehow, it was already abandoned." I was speechless. What I had seen that night didn't make sense, but now, with what the attendant told me, the pieces began to fit together in a terrifying way. How did that truck end up there? Why were the lights on? And who was that driver who just disappeared? The feeling of being watched never left me. I didn't know if I should believe that story, but the coincidence was too big to ignore. The worst part of all is that after that night, I never saw that truck again. I got back on the road, but the feeling that something wasn't right didn't leave me anymore. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a coincidence, but as the days went by, I became more and more obsessed with what had happened. I continued my journey, but the image of that truck stopped, the lights on and the keys on the seat, wouldn't leave my head. When I got home, I decided to try to understand more about what had happened, maybe even looking for some kind of rational explanation. I researched the truck, but didn't find anything that made sense. No police report, no information about the missing driver, just that oppressive silence that seemed to have swallowed everything. What disturbed me most was the fact that, although the truck had been found days before I passed by, no one seemed to know how it got there or what happened to the driver. All I knew was that whenever anyone passed through that area, they talked about a strange feeling. As if the truck was waiting for something. Or someone. And me? I couldn't shake the feeling that, perhaps, it had been that someone. As much as I tried to ignore it, there was something on the road, something that night, that was still there, waiting. I decided to return to 40 weeks later, with a heavy heart and a mind full of doubts. I tried to find some answer, perhaps to understand what really happened, but when I arrived at the place where I had seen the truck, there was no sign of it anymore. The shoulder was empty, the road lonely again, with no trace of anything out of the ordinary. The road lights illuminated the stretch, but there was no longer that truck. No sign of him, nor of whoever was there. I looked around, searching for some kind of clue, but the only sound I heard was that of my own truck's engine, echoing into the void. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what was going on with that truck. All I know is that, even without answers, the feeling that something supernatural was there didn't leave me. The fear, that chill in my spine, never went away. I never found that truck again, but every time I get back on the road, I feel like it's still waiting. As if something had been left behind, something that cannot be explained. And, to this day, every time I see a truck parked on the side of the road, I get goosebumps. Because, who knows, he might be waiting for me again. I was driving on I-75 in Georgia. It was nighttime, and the road was empty, as it always is. It was one of those nights where the only thing you can hear is the sound of the truck's engine and the rhythm of the wheels cutting across the asphalt. I was starting to get tired, you know, the kind of tired that comes when you've spent more than 12 hours on the road. But the silence of the night felt welcoming, helping me stay alert. Until I heard the first sound. A bang. It wasn't the sound of something hitting the trailer, but something coming from inside it. Like a loud knock, like someone was trying to make noise inside. I blinked a few times, trying to understand what was happening. At first, I thought it was engine noise or some mechanical problem, but the sound persisted. Every few minutes, a stronger beat. It seemed to be coming from the back of the trailer, like someone was trying to get my attention. I braked, scared, and took a quick look in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something strange, but everything was as it should be. I stopped the truck on the side of the road, the night cold and silent, and got out, trying to find some explanation. I went to the trailer, opened the door with growing nervousness, and, to my surprise, it was empty. There was nothing inside, no explanation for that sound. There were no signs of anyone or anything that could have caused the crashes. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to process what had happened. Was I going crazy from spending so much time alone on the road? I convinced myself it was just a technical problem, something with the trailer, and got back in the truck. But the sounds didn't stop. Every kilometer, the knocks continued, coming from inside the trailer, strong and uninterrupted. Fear started to take over me. I didn't know what was happening, but something was very wrong. I continued my journey, but the feeling of discomfort did not leave me alone. The sounds continued throughout the night, increasingly intense banging, as if someone was banging on the walls of the trailer, trying to get out. It was a horrible feeling. I tried to focus on the road, but the sound seemed more and more real, as if the RV itself was alive and trying to communicate with me. No matter how much I looked back, there was nothing. The darkness of the road and the noise of the engine were the only things that accompanied me. I knew I had to continue, that this was just another one of the bizarre situations that happen on the road, but something inside me said that there was no logical explanation. I didn't know what to do. The sound of banging never stopped, and the feeling that something was hiding inside the trailer made me increasingly paranoid. But what really made me uneasy was the fact that no matter how much I looked back, there was nothing to justify those sounds. The trailer was empty, the engine worked perfectly, and the silence of the road only added to the mystery. I started to wonder if it was all just a figment of my imagination, perhaps caused by tiredness or the loneliness of the road. But even then, I knew something was up. I could feel it. That's when I decided to stop again. Something inside me said that I needed to investigate further, to understand once and for all what was happening. I parked the truck in a deserted spot on the road and went to the trailer, this time more cautiously. I looked around, but the road was completely deserted. It was as if that place was isolated from the world. I opened the trailer door once again, but the interior was still empty, nothing was out of place. The sound, which had stopped momentarily while I was outside, returned. Stronger knocks, as if someone was rubbing against the walls of the trailer, or even trying to get out of it. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and fear began to consume me. It was only after a while, when I was returning to the truck's cabin, that something caught my attention. I saw a rusty sign on the other side of the road. I decided to take a look at her. When I went there, I realized it was a small memorial, something simple, with a name engraved on it. R.I.P. Richard S. It was dated years ago, but something about those words made me stop. I've never been one to believe in coincidences, but at that moment, a strange feeling came over me. I went back to the truck, still unable to get the image of that memorial out of my head. Something was telling me I should investigate further. And it was then that I learned that the driver who died there, on that same stretch of road, was named Richard. I'm not one to get attached to these ghost stories or hauntings, but what was happening felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. The sounds continued, without explanation, and the name Richard seemed to resonate in my mind. What scared me most was that the feeling that he was still there, inside the trailer, never left me. With every mile I covered, it seemed like he was getting closer, like he was waiting for something. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that that person's name, Richard, was somehow linked to that road and that sound. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something much bigger than me was involved there. I couldn't stop thinking about it anymore. The name Richard echoed in my head every mile. I looked in the rearview mirror, feeling his presence, like he was there, invisible but still very present. The sound of banging inside the trailer continued. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was there, intensifying with each moment. As if the whole time he was trying to communicate, trying to warn me of something. Fear had already taken over me in a way I never imagined I would feel. I just wanted to finish that trip and get off that road as quickly as possible. But something told me that I shouldn't just move on. It was then that, in the middle of the night, on a more isolated stretch of road, the knock suddenly stopped. I stopped, my palms still sweating, and looked at the trailer. The silence was total. Something was about to happen, I knew it. I got out of the truck once again, hesitantly, and walked over to the trailer. The air was heavy, thick, and the feeling that something was wrong, something not visible, hit me hard. I opened the trailer door with a lump in my throat and, to my surprise, the door was harder to open, as if it was stuck by something. Finally, I managed to open it, and inside, there was nothing. Nothing but silence. I took a deep breath, confused, trying to process it all, but the sound of a car, coming from the road, interrupted me. When I looked at the road, I saw a figure standing in the distance. A man, standing still, as if waiting for something. I couldn't see the face, but the silhouette was familiar. Something inside me knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was Richard. I didn't know how, but his presence, the feeling that he was still in that place, became real. Before I could get closer, the figure disappeared into the darkness, as if it had never been there. I stood there, still, trying to understand what had happened. But the feeling of loss, of something incomplete, didn't leave me. I got back into the truck, and the banging sound finally stopped. When I arrived at the nearest town, I decided to ask about the accident. The story they told me was simple, but with immense weight. Richard, the driver, had died there, at that same point on the road, years ago, in a mysterious accident. There was no explanation as to what actually happened, but many passing motorists reported hearing strange sounds coming from empty trailers, as if something or someone was trapped. The strangest thing, however, was that no one knew what or who was trying to communicate. All they knew was that something inexplicable was happening on that road. I don't know what happened that night, or how it happened, but one thing is certain, Richard, or whatever, was not at peace.